Entitled X wanted it all, so I buried her in debt to save my son. I've been lurking on this sub for years, never thinking I'd have my own story to share. But life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs, and sometimes, when someone pushes you too far, even the most level-headed person can find themselves plotting revenge. This is the story of how my ex-wife tried to destroy everything I'd built, including my son's future, and how I made sure she'd regret it. The beginning. I met Vanessa, not her real name, back in 2011 at a tech conference in downtown Austin. I was there representing my employer, a mid-sized landscaping company where I handled business operations. We were looking to upgrade our customer management system, and I was taking notes at a presentation when I noticed her across the room. She stood out immediately, impeccably dressed in a fitted charcoal suit that screamed ambition, occasionally tossing her dark hair back when she laughed. I'm not typically the type to approach strangers, but something about her confidence drew me in. During the lunch break, I managed to accidentally end up in the same catering line. She was there representing her marketing firm, specializing in brand development for eco-friendly businesses. The irony wasn't lost on me. My landscaping company had just launched a water conservation initiative that was perfect for her portfolio. We exchanged business cards professionally, though we both knew there was more to it. Our first date was at a food truck on South Congress, neutral territory for two professionals testing the waters. She ordered some complicated fusion taco without even looking at the menu, chatting with the chef like they were old friends. I remember thinking how effortlessly she navigated social situations, something that had always been a struggle for me. We hit it off immediately. She was ambitious, smart as hell, and had this way of making everyone around her feel special. I fell hard. 6 months later, we were living together in a small apartment off South Lamar, and by 2013, we were married at a vineyard out in Dripping Springs with the hill country sunset as our backdrop. My parents, who had divorced bitterly when I was 12, seemed genuinely happy for me. Her family, East Coast money with impossibly high standards, appeared less enthusiastic about their daughter marrying the gardener, as her father somewhat dismissively referred to me at the rehearsal dinner. Our wedding was more lavish than I'd budgeted for, but Vanessa insisted on certain touches: imported flowers, a string quartet, personalized cocktails. I dipped into my savings to cover the extra expenses, telling myself it was a one-time splurge. In retrospect, it was the first red flag I chose to ignore. Vanessa had expensive tastes and little concept of financial restraint, having grown up with family money that somehow never quite materialized in her bank account. Still, the first 2 years were good. We traveled, built our careers, and talked about starting a family. Vanessa was reluctant at first, worried about the timing, her career trajectory, whether we had enough space in our apartment. When she finally agreed, she approached parenthood like another project to manage, reading all the books and downloading pregnancy tracking apps. I was just happy we were taking the step. Our son, Jake, came along in 2015. The moment I held him, something shifted in me. I'd always been career-focused, putting away modest savings, but generally living in the moment. Suddenly, I was thinking about college funds, retirement accounts, life insurance policies, and emergency savings. Fatherhood transformed my relationship with money overnight. I started a trust fund for Jake that same month, putting in $200 from each paycheck religiously. It wasn't much, but I was determined it would grow over time. Vanessa thought it was sweet, but unnecessary. He's barely breathing on his own, and you're already worrying about his student loans? She'd joke. She didn't oppose the trust fund, but she never contributed to it either, not even when she received her annual bonus. Her priorities were different: designer baby clothes, professional photo shoots every 3 months to document Jake's growth, and researching the most exclusive preschools in Austin years before he'd need them. By 2017, I'd left the landscaping company and started my own business. Nothing fancy, just a small operation focusing on sustainable landscaping for Austin's booming eco-conscious homeowners. The initial investment came from my personal savings, about $25,000 that I'd been setting aside for years. Vanessa supported the move verbally, but seemed concerned about the financial risk. "Just don't touch Jake's college fund if it goes under," she said once, half joking, but with an edge that suggested she wasn't entirely confident in my business acumen. The first year was brutal. Long hours, unreliable subcontractors, clients who changed their minds mid-project, and the constant stress of meeting payroll for the 2 employees I'd hired. I was working 6, sometimes 7 days a week, often coming home after Jake was already asleep. Vanessa picked up the slack with parenting, to her credit, but she made sure I knew exactly how much she was sacrificing. I turned down drinks with the SXSW marketing director because someone had to be here for our son, she'd say. Or the nanny called in sick again, so I had to reschedule a client meeting. Despite the challenges, the business began to find its footing. Word-of-mouth referrals brought in steady clients, and our reputation for environmentally conscious landscaping resonated with Austin's affluent environmentalists. I secured a contract with a local restaurant chain to maintain their outdoor dining areas, providing a reliable monthly income stream. Vanessa seemed genuinely impressed when I showed her the business's growth charts at the end of that first year. Her career was taking off too. She'd been promoted to senior marketing director at a trendy downtown firm, working with all these up-and-coming tech startups. Her salary had surpassed mine, which she occasionally mentioned during arguments about household expenses. "I'm carrying more than my share financially," she'd point out, conveniently ignoring that my business was still in its growth phase and that I was still contributing to Jake's trust fund without fail. We bought a house on the outskirts of Austin, not quite Lake Travis luxury, but with a decent view and good schools nearby. The mortgage was steep, but with our combined incomes, it was manageable. Vanessa insisted on numerous upgrades during the purchase: premium appliances, custom closets, a water feature in the backyard. "We're investing in our future," she argued when I expressed concern about the mounting costs. Life was good, not perfect, what marriage is, but solid, or so I thought. The cracks began to show. The trouble started around 2019. Jake was in preschool now, and Vanessa was increasingly absent from his daily routine. She'd left the morning drop-offs entirely to me, claiming early meetings prevented her from doing the school run. She was working later and later, networking at happy hours that somehow stretched past midnight. She'd come home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine, her explanations growing thinner. "Client meetings," she'd say dismissively, already scrolling through her phone before I could ask any follow-up questions. One night, after she'd missed Jake's preschool performance, he'd been a tree in some environmentally themed play, and despite my obvious bias, the best damn tree on that stage, I tried to have a serious conversation. I mentioned how Jake had looked for her in the audience, how he'd asked where Mommy was as the other kids ran to their parents afterward. She got defensive immediately. "You think I wanted to miss it? I was finalizing the biggest account our firm has ever handled. Do you have any idea how important this client is? This could mean a promotion, Ryan, a significant one." "I understand your career matters," I said carefully, "but Jake needs to see both his parents supporting him." That's when she turned it around on me. "That's rich coming from you. Where were you his first year when you were working every weekend getting your business off the ground? You're always covered in dirt from work," she snapped. "Some of us have professional careers, Ryan. I can't just turn down events because you're feeling insecure about my success." It wasn't about her success. I was proud of what she'd accomplished, but about our family's balance. I suggested counseling, thinking a neutral third party might help us communicate better. To my surprise, she agreed, even researching therapists and scheduling our first appointment. But then she cancelled 3 appointments in a row, each time with a legitimate-sounding reason that I couldn't argue with. After the 3rd cancellation, I stopped pushing it. Meanwhile, I kept building my business and growing Jake's trust fund, which had reached about $50,000 by then. I'd never touched a penny of it. That money was sacred to me. It represented everything I wanted for my son: opportunities, security, choices I never had growing up with parents who lived paycheck to paycheck. My father had been laid off from his manufacturing job when I was in high school, and we'd nearly lost our house. The memory of that financial insecurity still haunted me, and I was determined Jake would never experience that kind of stress. In early 2020, right before the pandemic hit, I found text messages on Vanessa's phone. I'm not proud of looking, but the circumstances were innocent enough. She'd left it unlocked while showering, and a notification popped up from someone saved as MD Project Lead. The message preview was explicit enough that I knew this wasn't about marketing campaigns. Curiosity and dread compelled me to open the conversation, where I found months of intimate exchanges, photos that weren't meant for my eyes, and plans for secret meetups. His name was Michael Davidson, some hotshot developer from a tech startup in the domain. From their messages, I pieced together that they'd been seeing each other for 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of me thinking we were just going through a rough patch, of believing her when she said she was working late. When confronted, she didn't even deny it. There was no tearful apology, no pledge to end it, no request for forgiveness. "We've been roommates for years, Ryan," she said, her voice cold and dismissive. "You're so wrapped up in your dirt business and being super dad that you never saw me anymore. Michael and I connect intellectually and professionally in ways you and I never could." The statement hit like a physical blow. After 9 years together, I'd been reduced to dirt business and her emotional needs classified as intellectual connections with some app developer. I asked her to leave that night. She refused, pointing out that her name was on the mortgage and that she wasn't going to disrupt Jake's life because I was having an emotional overreaction to adult complications. Then C-19 hit, and we were stuck in a bizarre pandemic purgatory, sleeping in separate rooms, barely speaking except about Jake, both of us unable or unwilling to make the final move toward divorce while the world was falling apart. Vanessa continued seeing Michael, though less frequently due to lockdowns. She wasn't even particularly discreet about it anymore, taking calls from him in the backyard where I could hear snippets of intimate conversation. The business suffered during the early pandemic months. Residential clients cancelled services to cut costs, and the restaurant chain temporarily closed their outdoor dining areas. I applied for a PPP loan to keep my employees paid, but the process was a bureaucratic nightmare of endless forms and documentation. I ended up taking out a personal loan to cover payroll while waiting for the government assistance to come through. For her part, Vanessa's marketing firm pivoted to helping businesses develop online presences, and she was busier than ever. She worked from home, commandeering the dining room as her office space, conducting Zoom meetings at full volume, while I tried to help Jake with his online kindergarten classes in the adjacent living room. Despite the financial strain, I continued contributing to Jake's trust fund, though I had to reduce the amount temporarily. Every deposit felt like a small victory, a promise kept to my son that no matter what happened between his parents, his future would be secure. The trust fund plot. Fast forward to late 2022. The world had somewhat normalized, and Vanessa finally filed for divorce. My business had recovered and even expanded as Austin's housing market exploded and new homeowners wanted sustainable landscaping for their properties. I'd hired 2 more full-time employees and established a solid reputation in the eco-friendly landscaping niche. But this wasn't going to be an amicable split, oh no. She'd spent the past 2 years building her case, documenting every perceived failure of mine while portraying herself as Austin's Mother of the Year when it suited her. She'd joined the PTA at Jake's elementary school, volunteered for field trips, always the ones that required minimal time commitment but maximum visibility, and started a mommy blog chronicling her journey as a successful career woman balancing motherhood and personal fulfillment. The blog conveniently omitted her ongoing affair with Michael, who by this point had moved to a condo downtown. The real shock came during our first mediation session. Her lawyer, some slick guy from a downtown firm with offices overlooking Lady Bird Lake, presented their demands with the smug confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. She wanted the house, despite having contributed less to the mortgage, primary custody of Jake, despite having shown minimal interest in day-to-day parenting until recently, substantial alimony, despite making more than me, and, this was the kicker, control of Jake's trust fund. Mrs. Matthews has concerns about the management of the minor child's finances, her lawyer stated coolly, sliding a document across the table. Given Mr. Matthews' inconsistent business income and questionable financial decisions, my client believes the trust should be under her sole control to ensure it's properly invested and secured for the child's future educational needs. I nearly lunged across the table. My lawyer, Sarah, a no-nonsense family attorney I'd found through a business client, physically put her hand on my arm to steady me. She'd warned me that mediation could get ugly, but I hadn't expected this level of calculated greed. The trust fund that my client established and solely contributed to for 7 years? Sarah countered, her voice level, but with a steel edge. The one that Mrs. Matthews has never put a single dollar into? That trust fund. Vanessa just smiled that corporate smile of hers, the one she used on difficult clients. "I'm thinking of Jake's future," she said sweetly. "And frankly, Ryan, your little gardening business isn't exactly stable. We all saw how quickly it faltered during C-19. The trust would be better protected under my management with proper investment strategies." Left unsaid was her implication that her business connections, particularly Michael, who worked in fintech, would somehow yield better returns than my consistent conservative approach. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of Vanessa getting her hands on that money meant for Jake's education, not for her and Michael's weekend trips to Fredericksburg, made me physically ill. I'd read texts between them where they joked about upgrading their lifestyle once the divorce was finalized. Sarah had assured me that courts rarely reassign trusts established by one parent, but Vanessa had this way of twisting narratives. She was already painting me as financially irresponsible, despite the fact that I'd grown a successful small business while still putting away thousands for our son. I knew Vanessa too well. She didn't want that money for Jake. She wanted to hurt me, to take the one thing I was most proud of, providing for my son's future in a way my own parents couldn't do for me. And knowing her spending habits, I had legitimate concerns about how quickly that money might disappear if she gained control of it. The discovery. A week later, I was going through old financial documents for the divorce disclosure when I found it, paperwork for a joint line of credit we'd opened in 2016. We'd used it briefly for some home renovations, then largely forgotten about it after paying it down, but it had never been closed. I recalled the project vividly. Vanessa had wanted to transform our basic backyard into an entertainment space with a built-in grill, pergola, and water feature. The quotes from contractors had been astronomical, so I'd suggested doing much of the work ourselves to save money. Vanessa had dismissed the idea, insisting on professional installation. "If we're going to do it, let's do it right," she'd argued. The project had gone over budget, of course, but the end result was the perfect backdrop for the numerous work parties she'd hosted, strategically inviting colleagues and potential clients to showcase our lifestyle. I checked our credit reports. The account was still active, with a $100,000 limit and nearly zero balance. Vanessa had probably forgotten it existed. She'd always been careless about financial details that didn't involve spending money. She'd once lost track of a credit card for so long that it was closed for inactivity, only discovering this when she tried to use it for an impulse purchase at some boutique downtown. Then, I remembered something. Back in 2018, when I was setting up my landscaping business as an LLC, our accountant had advised creating a clear separation between business and personal finances. I'd opened business accounts, applied for commercial credit, done everything properly. But during the early pandemic, when contracts dried up, I'd taken out significant personal loans to keep the business afloat, about $80,000 worth. I'd been careful to use my name only, keeping the business entity separate to protect our household finances. Those loans had high interest rates, and I'd been struggling to pay them down while still contributing to Jake's trust fund and covering household expenses. My business had recovered, but those loans were like an anchor dragging behind me, limiting growth and eating into profits with their monthly payments. I sat there staring at the joint credit line paperwork, a plan forming in my mind. It wasn't something I'd normally consider. I'd always prided myself on doing things the right way. But Vanessa's attempt to take Jake's trust fund changed everything. This wasn't just about our divorce anymore. This was about protecting my son's future from someone who'd betrayed both of us. The plan, I called Sarah the next day and carefully broached the subject. Hypothetically speaking, I began, what happens to joint debts in a divorce? Sarah sighed, probably sensing the direction of my thoughts. Texas is a community property state. Generally, debts incurred during the marriage are considered community debts, regardless of whose name is on them. During divorce, the court divides them in a just and right manner, which doesn't necessarily mean 50-50ths. What about debts on joint accounts? I pressed. Those usually get split unless there's clear evidence that the debt benefited only one spouse, she explained. Ryan, whatever you're thinking. Just exploring my options, I said quickly, not wanting her to be complicit in anything questionable. One more thing, if a business owner personally guaranteed loans for their business during marriage, are those considered community debt? She paused. It's complicated. Courts look at whether the business was providing family income, whether both spouses benefited from the business, and the timing of the debt relative to separation. But Ryan, seriously, I need to caution you against any financial maneuvers at this stage. Judges look very unfavorably on attempts to manipulate assets or debts during divorce proceedings. I thanked her for the information and changed the subject to Jake's upcoming school event, which Vanessa was trying to prevent me from attending despite it being during my designated time with him. Next, I consulted a finance buddy who owed me a favor from back when I'd redesigned his company's courtyard at cost. I laid out the situation without specifics, presenting it as a friend's situation we both knew was transparent, but maintained the fiction. Technically, both parties are fully responsible for joint accounts until a divorce decree says otherwise, he confirmed. But transferring personal debt to a joint account right before divorce? Courts might view that as financial misconduct if it's clearly done to manipulate the divorce outcome. I asked about the business angle. That's murkier, he admitted. If you can document that the joint line was sometimes used for household expenses, and if your business supports the household, there's a grey area. But I'm not advising this, understand? It's legally questionable at best. I thanked him and hung up. What I was considering walked a fine ethical line, maybe even crossed it. But then I thought of Vanessa trying to take Jake's college fund, money she'd never contributed to, just to spite me. I thought of her dismissing my dirt business while enjoying the lifestyle it provided. I thought of texts I'd seen where she'd told Michael they could use Jake's trust fund to pay for lavish family vacations, since that's educational too. I made my decision. The execution. Over the next week, I meticulously documented everything. I gathered records showing that the joint credit line had originally been used for home improvements, specifically that backyard renovation that Vanessa had pushed for so she could host her work colleagues for barbecues. I found emails where she'd discussed the project, texts where she'd authorized expenses, and photos she'd posted on social media showcasing the completed space with captions about investing in our home. I also compiled evidence linking my business to our family finances, tax returns showing business income that supported our household, documentation of the cars and vacations Vanessa had enjoyed thanks to that income, and records of the health insurance for both her and Jake that was provided through my LLC. Then I attempted to transfer my personal business loans to the joint credit line, but it wasn't nearly as simple as I'd imagined. The first banker I spoke with raised immediate red flags. Sir, this is a significant transfer to a joint account. We'll need authorization from both account holders, she explained, eyeing me suspiciously over her reading glasses. I tried another branch with another approach, claiming I was consolidating our shared debts. The second banker seemed hesitant, but more accommodating. I can process a partial transfer, but I'll need documentation showing these are household-related expenses, he explained, and there will be a review process. I provided carefully selected documentation, invoices for business equipment that had been temporarily stored at our home, maintenance expenses for the truck that, while primarily used for business, had also served as our family vehicle for camping trips, and landscaping supplies that had been used both for clients and for maintaining our own property. It took 3 attempts at different branches, multiple phone calls explaining my debt consolidation strategy, and some creative paperwork connecting my business expenses to our household. In the end, I managed to transfer $50,000 of the $80,000 I'd planned. The bank flagged the remaining amount for additional verification. Verification I knew would never come since Vanessa would contest it the moment she was notified. I had to move quickly before Vanessa caught wind of this. The bank would send notification letters to our home address, and though Vanessa rarely checked mail, it was only a matter of time. I made sure I was the one collecting mail every day, intercepting bank correspondence before she could see it. I also set up online access to the joint credit account using our shared email, which she never checked, and then changed the contact email to a new address she didn't have access to. Was it technically legal? In the grey zone at best. Ethically questionable? Absolutely. But I was beyond caring about playing nice. This was financial self-defense against someone who'd shown she'd stop at nothing to hurt me, even if it meant raiding our son's future. Within 2 weeks, as expected, the credit reporting agencies updated our profiles with the new debt load. It wasn't the clean $80,000 transfer I'd hoped for, but $50,000 was still significant enough to impact our divorce proceedings. The community debt would need to be factored into our property division. What I hadn't anticipated was the series of voicemails from the bank that started arriving on Vanessa's phone, leaving messages about unusual account activity that required her attention. Predictably, she ignored them. She always ignored anything that sounded like financial responsibility, but it was another ticking clock in my risky plan. I also hadn't counted on the bank's fraud department taking a special interest in the transfers. 2 weeks after I'd completed the transfers, I received a call from a fraud investigator asking pointed questions about the transactions. I maintained that these were legitimate debt consolidation moves, connecting business expenses that had always been intermingled with family finances. The investigator seemed skeptical, but ultimately took no immediate action, instead noting that there would be further review. The stress was almost unbearable. I began having trouble sleeping, jumping whenever my phone rang and checking the mail multiple times a day. Jake noticed the change in my behaviour, asking why I was always looking worried. I hated that my actions were affecting him, even indirectly, but I kept reminding myself that I was fighting for his future. The fallout. Our next mediation session was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I arrived early, calm and prepared on the outside, but anxious and questioning my decisions internally. I'd rehearsed responses to potential questions about the debt, going over various scenarios with Sarah, who remained unaware of what I'd done but had warned me again about any financial maneuvers. Vanessa showed up late as usual, looking immaculate in designer business attire, her lawyer trailing behind with an air of annoyed impatience. She barely acknowledged me, spending the minutes before the mediator arrived showing her lawyer photos on her phone, both of them laughing at something I wasn't privy to. Things proceeded routinely until the financial disclosures came up. Vanessa's lawyer flipped through the updated credit reports, then did a visible double take. There seems to be a significant new debt on a joint credit line, he noted, frowning. $50,000 that wasn't there in the previous disclosure. Vanessa looked up sharply. What? That's impossible. My lawyer calmly slid forward a folder of documents. My client consolidated some business loans using a joint credit facility that was established during the marriage and previously used for household improvements. Here's the documentation showing Mrs. Matthews' prior knowledge and use of this account. Vanessa's face transitioned from confusion to comprehension to fury in seconds. "You did this on purpose," she hissed across the table. "This is fraud. I never approved this." "You've been ignoring calls from the bank for weeks," I replied, which was true. "The business supported our family for years. The business you called playing in the dirt." Her lawyer examined the documents carefully, then pulled out his phone and started typing frantically. "This appears to be a deliberate attempt to burden my client with additional debt on the eve of divorce proceedings. We'll be demanding a forensic financial audit and asking the court to assign this debt solely to Mr. Matthews, along with penalties for financial misconduct." Sarah countered, maintaining a professional tone despite the tension. The debt in question funded a business that provided substantial income to the household throughout the marriage. Furthermore, Mrs. Matthews actively participated in decisions regarding this joint credit line in the past. The documentation shows a clear pattern of using this credit facility for purposes that benefited the family, including Mrs. Matthews professionally. The mediator, a retired judge with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, reviewed the documents with a practiced eye. "This is precisely why I hate last-minute financial manoeuvring," he said, looking directly at me with clear disapproval. "Mr. Matthews, the timing here is beyond suspicious. Mrs. Matthews, your claim of complete ignorance is undermined by these bank records showing multiple notification attempts." He sighed heavily. "This issue is beyond mediation. The court will need to determine if this constitutes financial misconduct and how to appropriately divide this debt." Vanessa exploded. "I want him investigated. This is criminal. He's trying to screw me over just like his father screwed over his mother." She was referring to something I'd shared with her years ago about my parents' divorce, a low blow that showed how little she respected boundaries. Her lawyer tried to calm her, but Vanessa was on a roll now, her carefully maintained corporate image cracking. "And he's been hiding money for years. That trust fund. Ha! I bet half of it is just a tax dodge. He's always been sneaky with money, always criticizing my spending while squirreling away cash." The mediator called for a 15-minute break, clearly irritated by Vanessa's outburst. As her lawyer led her out, I could hear him admonishing her about composure and courtroom strategy. Sarah turned to me once we were alone. "Ryan, tell me honestly, did you transfer these debts specifically to influence the divorce?" I hesitated. "I consolidated debt to a lower interest rate. The timing was convenient." She shook her head. "The court won't see it that way. We need to prepare for this to backfire. Judges have wide latitude in community property states, and if they determine this was done in bad faith, you could end up with all of the debt plus penalties." She paused. But her reaction didn't do her any favors. We'll focus on that angle, that her financial irresponsibility and emotional instability make her unsuitable to manage Jake's trust fund. When we reconvened, Vanessa had composed herself, but there was a new brittleness to her professional veneer. Her lawyer had clearly coached her during the break, and she now sat rigidly, occasionally shooting me venomous glances. As we moved on to discuss Jake's trust fund, I noticed that while the debt issue had clearly backfired somewhat on me, Vanessa's emotional outburst had done her no favors either. Her lawyer seemed hesitant to let her speak directly about financial matters now. "Regarding the minor child's trust fund," the mediator said, "this too may require court intervention. Mr. Matthews has documentation showing his sole contributions, but Mrs. Matthews raises questions about the management and transparency of these funds." By the end of the session, nothing was resolved. The debt issue had complicated everything, and while Vanessa's demand for the trust fund hadn't gained traction, neither had it been definitively rejected. We were headed to court, and both of us faced potential financial scrutiny that made me increasingly nervous. The resolution. The divorce proceedings dragged on for another 8 painful months. The debt transfer became a central issue, with 3 separate hearings dedicated just to that matter. The judge, a stern woman with 20 years on the bench, ordered a complete forensic audit of our finances going back 5 years. The audit was hellish. Every bank statement, credit card transaction, and business expense was scrutinised. I had to produce receipts for equipment purchases from 2019. The process cost me nearly $12,000 in additional legal and accounting fees I hadn't budgeted for. The forensic accountant found numerous instances where business and personal expenses had been commingled even before the debt transfer, a common issue for small business owners, but one that undermined my claim that the debt transfer was a simple consolidation. He also discovered emails where I discussed the potential impact of the debt transfer on divorce proceedings with my finance buddy, which looked particularly damning. On the other hand, the audit also uncovered Vanessa's financial mismanagement. There were multiple instances of her concealing purchases, maintaining a secret credit card I hadn't known about, and spending far beyond our agreed budget on luxury items. Most damning was an email thread between her and Michael where they explicitly discussed using Jake's trust fund for a down payment on a vacation property once she gained control of it. Vanessa, predictably, made things worse for herself at every turn. When questioned about her own spending, she became defensive and contradicted herself repeatedly. She claimed ignorance of basic financial matters while simultaneously insisting she was the financially responsible one. When pressed about her lack of contributions to Jake's trust fund, she snapped at her own lawyer. I contributed by letting him put money there instead of buying me the Lexus I deserved. The judge visibly winced at that comment. In one particularly memorable hearing, Vanessa showed up late, reeking of mimosas from what was clearly a boozy brunch, and interrupted her own lawyer's arguments about her financial acumen by loudly whispering, "Just tell her I want the house and the money. Why is this so complicated?" Her relationship with Michael had begun to fray under the stress of the prolonged legal battle. He'd apparently expected a quick divorce with substantial financial benefits, not an extended legal saga that was draining her emotionally and financially. His appearances at hearings became less frequent, and Vanessa arrived alone more often, looking increasingly frazzled. Meanwhile, I focused on being the stable parent for Jake. I never missed a school event, maintained his routine as much as possible during my time with him, and worked with his therapist to help him process the divorce in age-appropriate ways. I also began documenting Vanessa's parenting lapses, not out of vindictiveness, but out of genuine concern for Jake's well-being. She'd forgotten 3 parent-teacher conferences, sent him to school without lunch twice, and once left him waiting at soccer practice for over an hour before remembering to pick him up. At the final hearing, the judge delivered her ruling with obvious frustration with both of us. This court does not condone Mr. Matthews' last-minute debt transfer, which appears calculated to influence these proceedings, she stated firmly. However, Mrs. Matthews demonstrated financial irresponsibility, documented history of excessive spending, and concerning attitudes toward child-focused financial planning also cannot be ignored. The judge assigned me 70% of the transferred debt, $35,000, and Vanessa 30%, $15,000. She also ordered me to pay $5,000 in legal fees to Vanessa's counsel, specifically related to the debt investigation. Regarding the minor child's trust, the judge continued, Mr. Matthews will maintain primary control as the establishing and contributing parent. However, the court is implementing oversight measures, including annual reporting requirements and restrictions on withdrawals. All educational expenses must be documented, and major withdrawals will require judicial approval until the minor reaches the age of 25. The outcome was messy. The house was sold, with the proceeds split 55/45 in my favour, after accounting for my higher contributions to the mortgage. We received joint custody with a 60/40th time split favouring me, largely due to Vanessa's documented absences from Jake's life. She didn't get alimony. Her income was higher than mine. And critically, Jake's trust fund remained protected, though with more bureaucratic oversight than before. What Vanessa didn't anticipate was how the $15,000 debt, combined with her habitual overspending, would impact her lifestyle. Her perfect credit score took a hit just as she and Michael were trying to finance renovations for the downtown condo they'd impulsively purchased. It wasn't the financial devastation I'd originally planned, but it was enough to make her feel the pinch. The aftermath. It's been about 14 months since the divorce was finalized, and the fallout continues to ripple through our lives in ways I didn't fully anticipate. I've moved with Jake to a smaller but comfortable house in a good school district. It's not what I'd planned. The legal fees and debt settlement took a bigger chunk of my savings than expected. My landscaping business is stable, but the growth I'd projected was delayed by the months I spent distracted by court proceedings and document gathering. The business has taken a secondary hit too. In our industry, word travels fast, and some potential clients have gotten wind of my financial troubles. A few have explicitly mentioned concerns about hiring someone who's dealing with personal issues. I've had to work twice as hard to prove my reliability and business acumen, often underbidding projects just to maintain cash flow. My employees have stuck with me, thankfully, though I had to be transparent with them about the company's situation. The trust fund is intact at about $105,000. I had to pause contributions during the worst of the legal battle, but have resumed now. The court-mandated oversight means annual accounting reviews that cost me about $1,500 a year, an annoying but manageable expense to ensure Jake's future remains secure. The silver lining is that the oversight provides an extra layer of protection. Vanessa can't claim I'm mismanaging the funds when there's a court-appointed financial advisor reviewing every transaction. Jake has adjusted as well as can be expected, though the prolonged divorce took its toll. His teacher noticed he became withdrawn during the worst of the proceedings and his grades slipped temporarily. I enrolled him in weekly therapy sessions with a child psychologist specializing in divorce, which has helped tremendously. He's back to his old self now, excelling in science, obsessed with soccer, and building elaborate Lego creations that take over the living room. Vanessa's relationship with Jake has been inconsistent at best. She maintains her visitation schedule when it's convenient for her, but she's missed 9 weekends in the past year for various emergencies. 3 times I've had to scramble for childcare when she simply didn't show up to collect Jake at the scheduled time, texting hours later with flimsy excuses. Jake has noticed, of course. "Does Mom not want to see me?" he asked once, breaking my heart. I've tried to explain that Mom loves him, but sometimes has trouble showing it properly, walking that fine line between honesty and protecting him from the full truth of her self-absorption. As for Vanessa herself, her financial situation has become increasingly chaotic, not entirely due to my actions, but they certainly didn't help. The $15,000 debt became $22,000 after she ignored payment notices for months, incurring penalties and increased interest. She and Michael had a very public falling out when their condo renovation went significantly over budget, and they couldn't secure additional financing due to her damaged credit score. What was supposed to be a 6-week project stretched into 6 months of living in a construction zone, with contractors walking off the job when payments were delayed. According to mutual friends, she blames me entirely for her financial troubles, telling anyone who'll listen that I financially abused her during the divorce. She conveniently omits her attempt to seize Jake's college fund or her years of carefree spending on our joint accounts. She's even told people that I stole money from her, a narrative that has unfortunately gained traction in certain social circles. I've lost friendships over it, people who only heard her side and made their judgments accordingly. Her bitterness has manifested in petty ways that increasingly affect Jake. She accidentally donated Jake's favorite gaming console after a weekend visit, claiming she thought it was old equipment she'd purchased. She enrolled him in an expensive summer camp during my custody time without consulting me, then told Jake I was too cheap to pay for it when I refused. She's contested 3 times the amount I claim for Jake's medical expenses on our shared healthcare responsibility, forcing me to provide excessive documentation for routine doctor visits. The most concerning incident happened last month when she forgot to give Jake his allergy medication during her weekend, resulting in an ER visit when he had a reaction to a friend's cat. When confronted, she blamed her assistant for not reminding her, though she's never mentioned having an assistant before. The judge has warned her that continued medical neglect could result in a modification of our custody arrangement, which has temporarily improved her attention to Jake's basic needs. Her professional life has suffered as well. The marketing firm where she was a star performer conducted layoffs after losing a major client, and Vanessa was among those let go. Though she'd never admit it, I suspect her increasing personal drama and erratic behaviour contributed to the decision. She's done some freelance work since then, but nothing stable. Michael, who had seemed so enamored with her during the affair, has apparently grown tired of supporting her financially and emotionally. According to Jake, they fight frequently when he's at their place. Do I regret what I did with the debt transfer? It's complicated. The move partially backfired, costing me significantly in legal fees and court scrutiny. I underestimated how messy divorce finances would get once lawyers and forensic accountants became involved. If I could go back, I might have fought for Jake's trust fund through more transparent means, perhaps by simply documenting Vanessa's irresponsible spending patterns and explicit statements about using the money for non-educational purposes. But the core outcome, protecting my son's future, was achieved. The judge saw through Vanessa's financial incompetence despite my questionable debt maneuver. Jake's college fund wasn't rated to fund Vanessa and Michael's downtown lifestyle, and that was my primary goal. The revenge wasn't as sweet or clean as I'd imagined. It didn't make Vanessa a better co-parent or a more responsible person. If anything, it reinforced her worst tendencies to blame others and avoid accountability. But it did establish a financial firewall between her impulsive spending and my son's future opportunities. I'm not proud of how I went about it. The ethical compromises I made still keep me up some nights, wondering what lessons Jake might inadvertently learn if he ever discovers the full story. I worry about the day he's old enough to understand the complexities of what happened between his parents and whether he'll judge me for the choices I made, even if they were ultimately for his benefit. For now, I'm focused on rebuilding my business, my relationship with Jake, and my own sense of integrity. I've started volunteering with a financial literacy program at Jake's school, teaching kids basic concepts about saving and responsible spending. It's my small attempt at karmic balance, perhaps, but also a genuine effort to help other children develop a healthier relationship with money than either of their parents might have. Final reflections. Looking back, I realized that Vanessa and I were financial incompatibles from the start. I grew up watching my parents struggle after my father lost his job, instilling in me a deep need for security and cautious planning. Vanessa was raised with family money that created an illusion of endless resources, though her parents' actual finances were more precarious than she'd admitted. We never truly addressed these fundamental differences, allowing them to simmer beneath the surface of our marriage until they boiled over in the most toxic way possible. If there's any lesson here, perhaps it's that financial compatibility is as important as emotional or physical compatibility in a relationship. Vanessa and I should have had honest conversations about money before marriage, before having Jake, before buying a house together. We might have realized sooner that our values were fundamentally misaligned, potentially avoiding years of growing resentment and the eventual scorched earth divorce. Would I do it again? The debt transfer? The financial maneuvering? Probably not, at least not in the same way. The stress, legal complications, and damage to my reputation weren't worth the tactical advantage it provided. I've learned that there are usually more direct, transparent paths to achieve the same goals, even if they require more patience and documentation. That said, I don't regret fighting for Jake's future with every tool at my disposal. Sometimes, when protecting your child, the line between right and wrong becomes blurred, and you make choices in the moment that look different in retrospect. I hope someday Jake will understand that whatever my methods, my motivation was always his well-being. The most concerning incident happened last month when she forgot to give Jake his allergy medication during her weekend, resulting in an ER visit when he had a reaction to a friend's cat Dot. When confronted, she blamed her assistant for not reminding her. Though she's never mentioned having an assistant before Dot, the judge has warned her that continued medical neglect could result in a modification of our custody arrangement, which has temporarily improved her attention to Jake's basic needs. Her professional life has suffered as well. The marketing firm where she was a star performer conducted layoffs after losing a major client, and Vanessa was among those let go. Though she'd never admit it, I suspect her increasing personal drama and erratic behavior contributed to the decision. She's done some freelance work since then, but nothing stable. Michael, who had seemed so enamored with her during the affair, has apparently grown tired of supporting her financially and emotionally. According to Jake, they fight frequently when he's at their place. Do I regret what I did with the debt transfer? It's complicated. The move partially backfired, costing me significantly in legal fees and court scrutiny. I underestimated how messy divorce finances would get once lawyers and forensic accountants became involved. If I could go back, I might have fought for Jake's trust fund through more transparent means, perhaps by simply documenting Vanessa's irresponsible spending patterns and explicit statements about using the money for non-educational purposes. But the core outcome, protecting my son's future, was achieved. The judge saw through Vanessa's financial incompetence despite my questionable debt maneuver. Jake's college fund wasn't rated to fund Vanessa and Michael's downtown lifestyle, and that was my primary goal. The revenge wasn't as sweet or clean as I'd imagined. It didn't make Vanessa a better co-parent or a more responsible person. If anything, it reinforced her worst tendencies to blame others and avoid accountability. But it did establish a financial firewall between her impulsive spending and my son's future opportunities. I'm not proud of how I went about it. The ethical compromises I made still keep me up some nights, wondering what lessons Jake might inadvertently learn if he ever discovers the full story. I worry about the day he's old enough to understand the complexities of what happened between his parents and whether he'll judge me for the choices I made, even if they were ultimately for his benefit. For now, I'm focused on rebuilding my business, my relationship with Jake, and my own sense of integrity. I quote VE, started volunteering with a financial literacy program at Jake's school, teaching kids basic concepts about saving and responsible spending. It quotes my small attempt at karmic balance perhaps, but also a genuine effort to help other children develop a healthier relationship with money than either of their parents might have. Final reflections. Looking back, I realized that Vanessa and I were financial incompatibles from the start. I grew up watching my parents struggle after my father lost his job, instilling in me a deep need for security and cautious planning. Vanessa was raised with family money that created an illusion of endless resources, though her parents' actual finances were more precarious than she'd admitted. We never truly addressed these fundamental differences, allowing them to simmer beneath the surface of our marriage until they boiled over in the most toxic way possible. If there's any lesson here, perhaps it's that financial compatibility is as important as emotional or physical compatibility in a relationship. Vanessa and I should have had honest conversations about money before marriage, before having Jake, before buying a house together. We might have realized sooner that our values were fundamentally misaligned, potentially avoiding years of growing resentment and the eventual scorched earth divorce. Would I do it again? The debt transfer? The financial maneuvering? Probably not, at least not in the same way. The stress, legal complications, and damage to my reputation weren't worth the tactical advantage it provided. I quote, V learned that there are usually more direct, transparent paths to achieve the same goals, even if they require more patience and documentation. That said, I don't regret fighting for Jake's future with every tool at my disposal. Sometimes, when protecting your child, the line between right and wrong becomes blurred, and you make choices in the moment that look different in retrospect. I hope someday Jake will understand that whatever my methods, my motivation was always his well-being.
The fact that you've saved $105K for your kids' college fund is honestly impressive, AF. Most kids don't have parents who care that much about their future.
This case has so many red flags it looks like a parade in Beijing. The debt transfer was legally questionable, but practically understandable given the circumstances. What's more concerning to me is the ongoing co-parenting situation. Your ex is demonstrating classic alienating behaviors, and the medical neglect is particularly alarming. I strongly recommend implementing a co-parenting app like our Family Wizard or App Close to document all communications and scheduling. This creates an admissible record of her missed visits, late returns, and any inappropriate comments. Regarding the trust fund, consider adding an additional layer of protection by converting it to a formal 529 plan if it isn't already. These have additional legal protections and tax advantages, plus many states add extra safeguards against misuse. The annual oversight fee is annoying but could prove invaluable if she attempts to challenge the arrangement again. Document everything about her parenting lapses, especially anything health-related. Courts take medical neglect extremely seriously, and if this pattern continues, you have grounds to request modification for sole medical decision-making authority at minimum. Your son deserves at least one stable, responsible parent, and it sounds like you're doing your best to be that for him despite extremely challenging circumstances.
This is why prenups exist, people.
The most concerning part of this story for me is how Jake is being used as a pawn. OP seems to genuinely care about his son's well-being, but the ex is clearly using him to hurt OP. As someone studying child psychology, I can tell you this kind of parental alienation causes lasting damage. Keep documenting everything and prioritizing therapy for Jake.
Reading stories like this makes me terrified to get married. I've been with my partner for 6 years, and we still keep our finances completely separate for this exact reason. The thought of someone trying to take money I saved for our future kids gives me actual nightmares. Glad your son's future is secured, OP.
As someone who works in family court, this happens way more than you think.
Your story perfectly illustrates the psychological concept of financial infidelity, which can be as damaging to relationships as sexual infidelity. Your ex-wife demonstrated classic signs of financial narcissism: excessive entitlement, lack of empathy regarding shared resources, and inability to delay gratification. Your response, while understandable, falls into the category of financial retaliation. This pattern is unfortunately common in high-conflict divorces, where one partner perceives an existential threat to their financial security or that of their children. The most concerning aspect is the impact on your son, who is observing these dynamics and forming his own relationship with money and trust. Children in these situations often develop either excessive frugality or problematic spending habits as adults. The therapy you've arranged is essential, but I would recommend also having age-appropriate conversations with him about healthy financial values without denigrating his mother's approach.
Dude, she sounds exactly like my ex, bullet-dodged.
What you did with the debt transfer was ethically questionable but financially sound strategy. I see this kind of thing in my profession all the time. The mistake wasn't transferring the debt, it was leaving such an obvious paper trail. Next time, use cash advances and keep your mouth shut about your intentions. Not that there should be a next time.
Reading this made my blood boil, poor Jake.
This story hit home for me on multiple levels as a financial planner who helps clients navigate divorce and as someone who went through a financially devastating divorce myself. There's so much to unpack here that I hardly know where to begin. First, let me address the debt transfer. What you did exists in a gray area that many desperate parents find themselves exploring during high conflict divorces. While I cannot professionally endorse such tactics, I understand the protective instinct that drives them. The financial industry has a term called BATNA, Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement, and sometimes people feel their BATNA involves ethically questionable choices when standard procedures seem rigged against them. Your ex's attempt to seize a trust fund she never contributed to represents such an extreme overreach that your reaction, while not ideal, becomes more understandable. From a financial planning perspective, the most impressive aspect of your story isn't the debt maneuver, but your consistent commitment to your son's future through the trust fund. The discipline required to contribute $200 per paycheck for years, even through business struggles and divorce proceedings, demonstrates exceptional financial parenting. Many of my clients cannot maintain such consistency, even in stable circumstances. This fund represents more than money. It embodies your values and priorities as a father. The forensic accounting process you described is unfortunately common and excruciatingly expensive. Small business owners are particularly vulnerable during divorce because business and personal finances often become intertwined despite best intentions to separate them. The documentation requirements can cripple a business operationally while the owner focuses on producing years of receipts and justifications. The fact that your business survived this process speaks to its underlying stability. Regarding your ex-wife's spending patterns and financial behavior, I recognize what financial psychologists call money disorders, specifically aspects of financial narcissism and compulsive spending. These patterns rarely improve without specialized therapy and often worsen under stress. Her declining financial situation post-divorce follows a predictable trajectory I've seen with clients who've never developed financial self-regulation. The irony is that her quest for control of your son's trust fund likely stemmed from subconscious recognition of her own financial instability. Looking forward, I have several professional recommendations. One, that consider transitioning the trust fund to a more structured vehicle like a 529 plan with restrictive distribution requirements. To implement additional protective measures for your business, including regular external audits and strict accounting protocols. 3, develop an age-appropriate financial education plan for your son that gradually introduces him to money concepts and responsibility. 4, create a comprehensive estate plan that includes protections against any future attempts to access his funds. 5, consider working with a financial therapist yourself to process the complex emotions around money that this experience has likely intensified. The volunteer financial literacy work you're doing is both admirable and psychologically insightful. Giving back in this way helps transform your difficult experience into something constructive, modeling positive money behavior for your son while potentially helping other families avoid similar situations. Most importantly, continue prioritizing your son's emotional well-being alongside his financial future. Money is ultimately just a tool. What matters most is raising a child who feels secure, valued, and loved regardless of financial circumstances. Based on your evident commitment to his welfare, I believe you're on the right path despite the difficult journey that brought you here.
What you did was technically fraud. Even if it didn't completely backfire, you got lucky with that judge. Most would have crucified you for the debt transfer, but I get why you did it.
Your dirt business sounds awesome, actually. Sustainable landscaping in Austin is huge right now. Don't let her put down your honest work.
As another small business owner who went through divorce, I feel your pain about the business/personal finance separation. It's incredibly difficult to maintain perfect boundaries when you're bootstrapping. The forensic accounting process is hell. Took me years to recover financially and professionally from something similar.
Not the asshole. You protected your kid's future. Full stop.
From a legal perspective, you played with fire and got burned, but not as badly as you could have. Many judges would view what you did as dissipation of marital assets, which can result in much harsher penalties. Your ex's behavior likely saved you from worse consequences. Document her continued medical neglect carefully. Mere jeeba bajet mein.
I've been on both sides of this equation, so I have a unique perspective. In my first marriage, I was the responsible one watching my ex spend us into oblivion while I tried to save for our kids. In my second, I was the higher earner who got accused of financial manipulation during the divorce. Here's what I learned. The courts don't care about justice. They care about paperwork and timelines. Your mistake was the timing of the debt transfer, not the transfer itself. If you'd done it 2 years earlier, it would have been perfectly legal. Your ex sounds like a piece of work, but you need to be extremely careful about bad-mouthing her to your son. Kids internalize that stuff and it becomes self-hatred. I'm half her, so I must be half bad. Document everything, but keep the negativity away from him. Focus on being the stable parent. In time, he'll see the truth for himself and your relationship will be stronger for your restraint.
I live in Austin too, and the divorce courts here are brutal. You actually got off easy compared to some stories I've heard. The property market here makes divorces even messier.
The story touches on so many aspects of financial psychology that I hardly know where to begin. The conflicting money scripts you and your ex brought into the marriage created a perfect storm. You operate from a security script, saving, planning for the future, protecting against uncertainty, while she clearly functions from a status script, spending visibly, using money to gain social approval, equating worth with possessions. Neither is inherently wrong, but they're fundamentally incompatible without extraordinary communication. What's fascinating is how these scripts intensified under stress. You became even more security-focused during the divorce, while she doubled down on status-seeking with a downtown condo and renovation. The most important thing now is to be mindful of what financial messages you're passing to your son. Children absorb money attitudes primarily from observing their parents. Your volunteering with financial literacy is excellent modeling, but be careful not to overcompensate by being overly restrictive or anxious about money in your son's presence. The trust fund is wonderful, but equally important is helping him develop a healthy, balanced relationship with financial resources that avoids both your ex's recklessness and what might be your own excessive caution.
I'm concerned about Jake in all this. Kids notice everything during divorce. Hope is doing okay with all the back and forth and missed weekends.
I've been mediating high-conflict divorces for nearly 25 years, and your story contains elements I see repeatedly in my practice. Let me break down what I observed from a professional perspective. First, the financial incompatibility you mentioned is indeed one of the top predictors of divorce. Studies consistently show that couples with misaligned money values face greater challenges than those who disagree on almost any other topic. Your security-focused approach versus her status consumption created inevitable conflict that would have surfaced eventually, regardless of the infidelity. The debt transfer falls into what we call divorce planning, actions taken specifically to influence the financial outcome of an impending divorce. Why your attorney correctly cautioned you about this, your execution had several critical flaws. The timing was too close to filing, the amount too significant relative to your normal financial patterns, and most damaging, you discussed your intentions with others who could testify to your motive. Had you transferred smaller amounts over a longer period, maintained plausible business justifications, and kept your strategy private, the outcome might have been different. What's particularly interesting is the judge's balanced ruling. Despite recognizing your inappropriate financial maneuver, she still awarded you primary custody and control of the trust fund. This suggests your ex-wife's behavior during proceedings was significantly concerning. Judges develop finely tuned radar for authenticity and responsible parenting, and your ex's courtroom behavior likely damaged her case substantially. The ongoing co-parenting challenges you describe follow a classic high-conflict pattern. The missed visitations, medical neglect, and financial weaponization, like the expensive summer camp, are unfortunately common tactics. Your approach of documentation without direct confrontation is wise. Many clients in your position make the mistake of engaging emotionally, which only escalates the conflict and damages the child. Looking forward, I'd recommend several protective measures. 1. Consider a custodial modification if the medical neglect continues. Courts take this extremely seriously. 2. Implement a communication system that documents all interactions. Co-parenting apps are excellent for this. 3. Request a right of first refusal clause, so when she cancels visitation, you have priority to care for Jake rather than unknown third parties. 4. Consider converting the trust to a 529 or UTME account with additional structural protections. 5. Maintain scrupulous financial boundaries going forward to rebuild your reputation. Finally, your recognition of the impact on Jake shows emotional intelligence many parents lack in high-conflict divorces. Children in these situations often develop what we call split loyalty, feeling they must choose sides or hide their feelings about one parent from the other. Your commitment to therapy and avoiding negative commentary about his mother will pay dividends in his long-term emotional health. While your financial maneuvering was ethically questionable, your prioritization of your son's well-being demonstrates the core values of good parenting, regardless of the circumstances.
I've worked in family law for 15 years and seen countless variations of this story. The debt transfer was risky and borderline unethical, but honestly pretty mild compared to what some clients attempt during divorce proceedings. I've seen people hide assets in cryptocurrency, loan money to relatives with secret agreements to return it post-divorce, deliberately tank businesses, and even feign terminal illness to manipulate property division. What saved you was your ex's visible financial irresponsibility and her damning statements about misusing the trust fund. For anyone reading this, judges hate financial games. They've seen every trick in the book. Your best strategy is almost always transparency and documentation of the other party's misconduct, rather than engaging in your own questionable maneuvers. That said, I understand the desperation that drives people to protect their children's futures by any means necessary. Document her continued neglect of your son and be prepared to request a custody modification if the pattern continues.